Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're going to talk about why the Insane Clown Posse deserves to be in the WWE Hall of Fame. Now, I don't think that they'll ever actually be in the Hall of Fame, even though we've seen some acts that are at the tail end of their career and aren't as famous as they were, like a Mr. T or a Kid Rock, go into the celebrity wing of the Hall of Fame. I don't think that ICP has quite the caveat that WWE would want. I think there might be an off chance somewhere down the line that they get in on one of those like unannounced contributors thing, but I'm going to make the argument as to why they should be there. And I'm going to preface this by saying their time in the WWE, or actually WWF when they were there, was rather short. It was only over a summer. But we're going to go by WWE's own criteria. There are people in the WWE Hall of Fame that have not spent 1 minute in the company. There are people in the WWE Hall of Fame that have only had one match in the company. So by that logic, it's more of a pro wrestling Hall of Fame. So with that, I'm going to make my case as to why I think they should be there. We're going to start off with their very early parts of their career. At the same time that ICP, originally the Intercity Posse, Violent J, and Shaggy 2 Dope, when they were starting their buzz and starting to get into music, they were also doing backyard wrestling and then morphed backyard wrestling into their own independent wrestling company. First starting off as Tag Team Wars and then becoming All-Star Wrestling. They were running independent shows in Michigan. At this time, they would also run shows for the Sheik and other people, and this is where they met other wrestlers who were coming up at the time in the very early 90s, like Sabu, like Rob Van Dam, who would kind of be friends and be part of their entire career in the wrestling side. Now fast forward a little bit, ICP starts getting a little bit of a buzz. They start making some underground moves. Their album, The Riddle Box, gets a little bit of fame. Great Malenko gets a lot of airplay. Around this time, they put out the legendary Stranglemania VHS cassette. Yes, people, this is that old. In about 1996, they released Stranglemania, which the best way I could explain it is if ICP did their version of Mystery Science Theater 3000 with Japanese deathmatch wrestling. And initially, this was something that was sold at their concerts. It sold really well. There was definitely a Venn diagram where juggalos and wrestling fans were meeting, especially at that time frame. Almost everybody that loved ICP also loved professional wrestling. Professional wrestling, if you remember, in the late 90s was probably at one of its hottest peaks ever. They had sprinkled references to wrestlers and wrestling all through their music. Their fans seemed to love it. They loved that connection. That tape sold really well. They re-released it a bunch of times as DVDs and whatever else it is. You can find it on YouTube. There is a link for the whole thing. I'm not going to put it here in the description, but if you search Stranglemania, you can find it. You can find it and a lot of the other stuff they've done in wrestling. Fast forward a little bit to Hardcore Heaven 1997. With their connections to Rob Van Dam and Sabu, they're brought into ECW on the pregame to basically come out and do a couple songs and then get attacked by their friends, Rob Van Dam and Sabu, and even the Sandman gets involved in it, thus starting their foray into the bigger leagues of pro wrestling. Now, ECW may have been the third biggest company of the three big companies at the time, but nonetheless, it was a company that was getting a lot of buzz, especially in 1997. They're on the second pay-per-view. That's their basic introduction to a bigger wrestling base that may have not known them already. Again, there's a lot of crossover from both of the fan bases. Fast forward a little bit longer. We go into the WWF in 1998. Jim Johnson asks them to come in and do a song for the Oddities, which, if you're watching this, I'm guessing you already have heard that song. They do an amazing theme song for what was basically a silly, goofy group that I don't think was ever going to go anywhere. During that time, they're on air with the Oddities. They also have a thing with the Headbangers. They do a little bit of comedy wrestling. They explain to WWF that they are wrestlers and have been wrestlers. They do a bit of it. I think there was definitely a match with the Headbangers, I remember, or at least they got involved with them and took some bumps. Sadly, their time in WWE or WWF, I'm going to say those interchangeably because it's the same company basically, wasn't very long. There was some backstage drama with them. They didn't want to get paid. All they wanted WWF to do was promote their CD that was coming out. Again, old media. And WWF kept promising them it, but never showing the commercial for it. So they decided to take their ball and go home. Now fast forward again to 1998. They joined another group of friends over in WCW. This time they're introduced as part of a group called the Deadpool with Vampiro and Raven, two guys that would continue to be associated with them all the way up to the present day. These guys have worked with the Insane Clown Posse in their own promotion, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. These guys are all friends. They actually both have done songs with the Insane Clown Posse. The Deadpool kind of goes away when Raven leaves WCW, morphs into the Dark Carnival, which gets the Great Muta and the Kiss Demon involved. We start to see more of ICP actually wrestling. There's some great matches and great footage at this time. Shaggy 2 Dope taking the powerbomb from Mike Awesome on top of the Partridge Van is something that sticks out in their wrestling career. I believe they wrestled the Filthy Animals. I'm not 100% sure, but they were in a lot of matches around this time, showing that they could actually wrestle. They were in WCW for 99 and 2000. At the same time, they went back to doing their independent pro wrestling stuff. First, they called it Hellfire Wrestling, which morphed into Juggalo Championship Wrestling, formerly Juggalo Championship Wrestling, in 1999. And since 99, for the last 25 years, off and on, that's been something they've done. There have been a couple cases where they've taken a few years off. I think during the COVID run, they didn't do anything there. But for the most part, it's always been kind of running and kind of part of what they do. Especially if you go to a gathering of the Juggalos, they always have some Juggalo Championship Wrestling stuff there, some events held there. They've done iPay-per-views, they've done stuff over the internet. Currently, they have a YouTube show weekly that you could watch. I haven't caught up on it yet, but eventually I will. I do want to watch it because I enjoy a lot of what they do, hence why I'm making this video. So that becomes their main foray into wrestling, which is kind of how they like wrestling. A little bit of the hardcore, a lot of respect paid for the wrestlers that came before them, wrestlers that they enjoyed. People like Greg Valentine, the Bushwhackers, Tito Santana, King Kong Bundy, Terry Funk, their friends Sabu and Van Dam, Raven, Vampiro. All these wrestlers appeared at some point in Juggalo Championship Wrestling, along with some of the up-and-coming younger wrestlers, especially in the deathmatch scene. Guys like Too Tough Tony, Madman Pondo, Corporal Robinson, and others. The Chris brothers, they all had some ties to Juggalo Championship Wrestling. Trent Acid, I think Trent Acid had the best run of anybody in Juggalo Championship Wrestling, in my opinion. They've been a steady presence on the independent scene since 1999. Now fast forward a little bit, they did have one little thing in Ring of Honor, which wasn't put out on the initial show it was on, but it was put on like a compilation DVD. They kind of got booed out of the building, I think, at that point, and I believe this was 2002, 2003, very early in the Ring of Honor run. The Ring of Honor fans just weren't into what ICP was doing. It was a different fan base. ICP would have probably fit better in XPW, which they did some work with XPW as well, or CZW, and not so much into the ultra serious at the time Ring of Honor product. Their next really big exposure comes in 2004, where they go to TNA for a little while. 2004 and 2006, they take a little bit of runs in TNA. Nothing really groundbreaking here, but just continuing their connection to pro wrestling. The one major thing that comes out of it, the first ever house show that TNA ran was booked by the Insane Clown Posse. They helped with the booking for that. So that's a footnote in history. As you can see, they've wrestled in Ring of Honor, ECW, WCW, WWF, TNA, pretty much all of your major or somewhat major companies over the last quarter of a century. They've also ran Juggalo Championship Wrestling. They've had the Stranglemania DVDs or VHSs, whatever you want to call them. They've included wrestlers in both of their movies. Mick Foley is in Big Money Hustlers with some others. In Big Money Rustlers, Scott Hall is one of the main characters in it. Sabu appears in it. There's other wrestlers that come in and out of them. But as you can see, that love of pro wrestling always paid back. They've they've had wrestlers in their music videos. I think the first one that they had was How Many Times with the Bushwhackers, the Honky Tonk Man, and Greg Valentine. Greg Valentine would go on to be on their Fuse show called ICP Theater, where they looked at, kind of did a Mystery Science Theater thing with music videos. Both Valentine and Vampira. So they always had that connection. Then you look at all the names they bring up in their songs. They brought up Sabu, obviously, and Van Damme, their friends. Guys like The Rock, Hulk Hogan, the Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry, not Mark and Jay. They've even made a song called Chris Benoit about losing your mind. It's not one of my favorites of theirs, but they did make it. So there's always been that connection. There's always been that pushing wrestling to the forefront. They're so tied in with wrestling. Even now, Violent J is doing stuff with the NWA, with the Brothers of Funstruction. He's been linked to them. He's appeared on their shows, which is kind of neat when you see the backstage stuff with Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins, one of the ultra-serious, critic-darling fans of the 90s, and ICP, one of the groups that the critics absolutely hated, getting along and talking wrestling through that connection that wrestling gives both of them. To me, their contributions, being in all these major promotions, running Juggalo Championship Wrestling, paying the respect they did to older wrestlers on basically all of their shows they've ever ran, I think that all makes them worthy of being in the celebrity wing of the WWE Hall of Fame. I think they definitely deserve it. Again, I don't think it's ever going to happen just because I don't think their name carries that cachet that even someone like a Cyndi Lauper might carry, which she deserves it as well. Don't get me wrong, I'm not poo-pooing on her. I just don't think they have that mainstream appeal where WWE would want to bring them in and put them as part of that. But I do think they deserve it. I'd love to see it happen someday. I don't think it ever will. Let me know what you think. Do you think ICP deserves to be in the WWE Hall of Fame? Do you think there's a chance they get there? Do you hate the Insane Clown Posse and hope that they never appear on any wrestling show again? Let me know down here in the comments. I doubt that's the fact if you stayed this far into a show talking glowingly about them. But anyway, let me know what you think down here in the comments. My name is George Coles, and this has been my argument for why ICP should be in the WWE Hall of Fame. And for all my juggalos and juggalettes out there, whoop whoop.